The ego and the self. Here's what I think. I think angels make their home in the self, while resistance has its seat in the ego. The fight is between the two. The self wishes to create, to evolve. The ego likes things just the way they are. What is the ego anyway? Since this is my book, I'll define it my way. The ego is that part of the psyche that believes in material existence. The ego's job is to take care of business in the real world. It's an important job. We couldn't last a day without it. But there are worlds other than the real world, and this is where the ego runs into trouble. Here's what the ego believes. First, death is real. The ego believes that our existence is defined by our physical flesh. When the body dies, we die. There is no life beyond life. Second, time and space are real. The ego is analog. It believes that to get from A to Z, we have to pass through B, C, and D. To get from breakfast to supper, we have to live the whole day. Third, every individual is different and separate from every other. The ego believes that I am distinct from you. The twain cannot meet. I can hurt you and it won't hurt me. Fourth, the predominant impulse of life is self-preservation. Because our existence is physical and thus vulnerable to innumerable evils, we live and act out of fear in all we do. It is wise, the ego believes, to have children to carry on our line when we die, to achieve great things that will live after us, and to buckle our seatbelts. Fifth, there is no God. No sphere exists except the physical, and no rules apply except those of the material world. These are the principles the ego lives by. They are sound, solid principles. Here's what the self believes. First, death is an illusion. The soul endures and evolves through infinite manifestations. Second, time and space are illusions. Time and space operate only in the physical sphere, and even here don't apply to dreams, visions, transports. In other dimensions, we move swift as thought and inhabit multiple planes simultaneously. Third, all beings are one. If I hurt you, I hurt myself. Fourth, the supreme emotion is love. Union and mutual assistance are the imperatives of life. We are all in this together. Fifth, God is all there is. Everything that is God in one form or another. God, the divine ground, is that in which we live and move and have our being. Infinite planes of reality exist, all created by, sustained by, and infused by the Spirit of God. Experiencing the self. Have you ever wondered why the slang terms for intoxication are so demolition-oriented? Stoned, smashed, hammered. It's because they're talking about the ego. It's the ego that gets blasted, waxed, plastered. We demolish the ego to get to the self. The margins of the self touch upon the divine ground, meaning the mystery, the void, the source of infinite wisdom and consciousness. Dreams come from the self. Ideas come from the self. When we meditate, we access the self. When we fast, when we pray, when we go on a vision quest, it's the self we are seeking. When the dervish whirls, when the yogi chants, when the sadhu mutilates his flesh, when penitents crawl 100 miles on their knees, when Native Americans pierce themselves in the sun dance, when suburban kids take ecstasy and dance all night at a rave, they are seeking the self. When we deliberately alter our consciousness in any way, we are trying to find the self. When the alcoholic collapses in the gutter, that voice that tells him, "I'll save you," comes from the self. The self is our deepest being. The self is united to God. The self is incapable of falsehood. The self, like the divine ground that permeates it, is ever growing and ever evolving. The self speaks for the future. That's why the ego hates it. The ego hates the self because when we seize our consciousness in the self, we put the ego out of business. The ego doesn't want us to evolve. The ego runs the show right now. It likes things just the way they are. The instinct that pulls us toward art is the impulse to evolve, to learn, to heighten and elevate our consciousness. The ego hates this, because the more awake we become, the less we need the ego. The ego hates it when the awakening writer sits down at the typewriter. The ego hates it when the aspiring painter steps up before the easel. The ego hates it because it knows that these souls are awakening to a call, and that call comes from a plane nobler than the material one and from a source deeper and more powerful than the physical. The ego hates the prophet and the visionary because they propel the race upward. The ego hated Socrates and Jesus, Luther and Galileo, Lincoln and JFK and Martin Luther King. The ego hates artists because they are pathfinders and bearers of the future, because each one dares, in James Joyce's phrase, to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. Such evolution is life-threatening to the ego. It reacts accordingly. It summons its cannon, marshals its troops. The ego produces resistance and attacks the awakening artist. Fear. Resistance feeds on fear. We experience resistance as fear. But fear of what? Fear of the consequences of following our heart. Fear of bankruptcy, fear of poverty, fear of insolvency, fear of groveling when we try to make it on our own, and of groveling when we give up and come crawling back to where we started. Fear of being selfish, of being rotten wives or disloyal husbands, fear of failing to support our families, of sacrificing their dreams for ours, fear of betraying our race, our hood, our homies, fear of failure, fear of being ridiculous, fear of throwing away the education, the training, the preparation that those we love have sacrificed so much for, that we ourselves have worked our butts off for. Fear of launching into the void, of hurtling too far out there. Fear of passing some point of no return, beyond which we cannot recant, cannot reverse, cannot resign, but must live with this cocked-up choice for the rest of our lives. Fear of madness, fear of insanity, fear of death. These are serious fears, but they are not the real fear, not the master fear, the mother of all fears that's so close to us that even when we verbalize it, we don't believe it. Fear that we will succeed, that we can access the powers we secretly know we possess, that we can become the person we sense in our hearts we truly are. This is the most terrifying prospect a human being can face, because it ejects him at one go, he imagines, from all the tribal inclusions his psyche is wired for and has been for 50 million years. We fear discovering that we are more than we think we are, more than our parents, children, teachers think we are. We fear that we actually possess the talent that our still, small voice tells us, that we actually have the guts, the perseverance, the capacity. We fear that we truly can steer our ship, plant our flag, reach our promised land. We fear this because, if it's true, then we become estranged from all we know. We pass through a membrane. We become monsters and monstrous. We know that if we embrace our ideals, we must prove worthy of them. And that scares the hell out of us. What will become of us? We will lose our friends and family who will no longer recognize us. We will wind up alone in the cold void of starry space, with nothing and no one to hold on to. Of course, this is exactly what happens. But here's the trick. We wind up in space, but not alone. Instead, we are tapped into an unquenchable, undepletable, inexhaustible source of wisdom, consciousness, companionship. Yeah, we lose friends, but we find friends too, in places we never thought to look. And they are better friends, truer friends. And we are better and truer to them. Do you believe me? The authentic self. Do you have kids? Then you know that no one of them popped out as tabula rasa, a blank slate. Each came into this world with a distinct and unique personality, an identity so set that you can fling stardust and great balls of fire at it and not morph it by one microdot. Each kid was who he was. Even identical twins, constituted of the exact same genetic material, were radically different from day one and always would be. Personally, I'm with Wordsworth. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's a star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. In other words, none of us are born as passive generic blobs waiting for the world to stamp its imprint on us. Instead, we show up possessing already a highly refined and individuated soul. Another way of thinking of it is this: we are not born with unlimited choices. We can't be anything we want to be. We come into this world with a specific personal destiny. We have a job to do, a calling to enact, a self to become. We are who we are from the cradle, and we are stuck with it. Our job in this lifetime is not to shape ourselves into some ideal we imagine we ought to be, but to find out who we already are and become it. If we were born to paint, it's our job to become a painter. If we were born to raise and nurture children, it's our job to become a mother. If we were born to overthrow the order of ignorance and injustice of the world, it's our job to realize it and get down to business.